Hey guys, welcome to the Tetra Health and Performance Podcast. Today we're tackling all things warm up. Hopefully, today we can give you some material to kind of improve your own warm ups and kind of help you structure and get the best out of your warm up before your session. We'll also try to explain our lens with how we see the warm up and what we use at the gym to get the best effects possible. And also, we're going to explain hopefully some fallacies that we see with warm ups and kind of tackle some common questions that we receive about the warm up. Guys, how should we start it?
Yeah, well, first off, with the warm up, I think it's actually extremely interesting when we look at studies on the warm up. Is what exactly are they looking at? Like they're looking at most of the time, and most studies point in this direction. They're looking at actually how the warm up affects the next exercise. So your warm up into whatever you're about to do, and they don't really look at the warm up through a bigger lens, like what's happening throughout the whole session from the warm up and then what's happening when we repeat a warm up week to week to week to week and the benefits that we might gain from that. There's a really good systemic review where they found that 79% of the studies they looked at showed improvements in performance after utilizing various warm up protocols. And that's one of the things, right? Like how many we all do warm ups. Like not many places will you go to and they won't do a sort of warm up in some way. And these warm ups going to vary. And you could do course after course after course, and you're going to find someone else's principles of a warm up. Well, these all vary. And I think one of the issues is if I stick to too tight a system with my warm ups, then my warm up doesn't have the ability to change to the purpose that I want the warm up to facilitate. And you find that when people actually set up the warm ups and they're setting this kind of, this is my protocol of warm up, I think they miss things on the table. Like they'll either have like, first thing we do is we get the body warm. Well, there's going to be times when maybe you don't want the body to be warm straight away. You want to get on the ground first. And there's going to be times where maybe you want to get warm straight away. So I think we have to look at like what is happening and what's the objective. What are we trying to drive physiologically, neurologically, like psychologically to get a good warm up. And we have to kind of break that down with like we like to do all the time, with as much research behind it as possible. So first off, what's actually happening, and well, the word warm up, right, gives us away, right? We can break warm up effects into two different categories: things that warm you up, and then things that don't really warm you up. So like temperature effects and non-temperature effects. And with that in mind, well, tons of what we get from, let's talk about temperature first, right? So when we actually heat up the body, we get tons of different effects. We get increased blood flow from heating up the body, which sends out like enzymes, sends blood out, which helps the body start creating the energy production of breaking down energy for use in muscles and whatnot. We get an enhanced like metabolic reactions from that. Our joints, so in all our joints, we have these viscous fluids. So fluids that aren't like just like your waters that are very uh, like soft. We have that kind of a bit stiffer um, fluids. Well, when they warm up, they become more malleable. So it instantly increases like range of motions through temperatures. We get like enhanced muscle contractions. Just so many different things that actually the temperature's doing. And then on the other side of things, we got the non-temperature things. Like we can look at it like more neurologically, like how the brain is starting to get excited. We can look at it psychologically. Well, hey, like it's a good time to understand that we're about to train, we're about to go hard, and we're just slowly like picking up like momentum to do so.
Yeah, definitely. Because people will come from a lot of different settings. As from, oh, I've just come from work. I've worked 8 hours. Now I have to get into a gym session. If you just throw them straight into doing this like heavy set of squats, they're going to be not only like physiologically challenged, but also psychologically. You haven't taken that transition. So I think the warm up is a really good opportunity where you can come in and you can do that. You can get in the right mindset to train.
I don't think you can talk warm up without talking what's happening with the brain, the nervous system. So, like, it depends, like, task dependent, like James kind of stated earlier. If you want to get adaptation, you want to affect these ranges of motion, that potential ranges of motion that can be increased, that happens through parasympathetic, like calming the body down. If you're running late from work and you're running in, you're stressed, like, oh shit, freak, I'm late, and you're running in. Oh, mate, I kind of guarantee you're not going to get as much adaptation as you could if we were maybe a bit earlier, we came on time, we had a moment to relax, we got on the ground, we did some slow breathing, and we worked some stuff in a floor base in a very more calm, relaxed atmosphere. So it's task dependent, right? If we are going for range of motion changes and we're slowly going to build the body up, We want that atmosphere where it's kind of chill, it's relaxed, the music maybe is down a bit, we're having a light chat, we're on the ground rolling around or doing some position-based breathing or movements, and we're more likely to get adaptation in that phase. And then maybe we might slowly build up into more of some faster paced drills where we're trying to get blood and heat in the body and get the nervous system revved up. But on the other side, there are times where you want to just straight away get heat in the body and you want to jump on the bike as quick as you can and just get the body warm and not worry so much about positional based breathing. So, where am I going with this? It's task dependent. What are we after? So, it depends what the objective is in the session and what you're currently after to what type of strategy you will be using. So, that is a tough one to look at for the warm up.
I think that's such an incredible point. And when we're looking, I'm just going to touch on that a little bit more. Like when we're looking at kind of them two different types of people's like attitudes towards their day and how they feel coming into the gym, we're going to have these more like you've heard us say this before. You're more parasympathetic. You're people who are a little bit more relaxed generally, and then you're going to have your more sympathetic people who are a little bit more like hyped up generally anyway. And if you are dealing with like a one-on-one with someone and they are coming in a little bit more like hyped up, then get them on the ground as soon as possible. Like calm them down, then pick them back up. And if you are dealing with someone who's a little bit more like you're kind of more relaxed person, then you still might want to get them on the ground, but then eventually you're going to have to pick them up again. So in a group training environment, we often go for the one that is going to target everyone. It's like no matter what, you're all going to get down most often than not. There'll be times where we don't, when we are changing up the speed of things, but most often we're going to get you down first. And I think when we look at stress, that we look at stress importantly, how stress is actually a very adaptive state. And what happens is that what we want to do is we kind of want to switch people off that day-to-day stress to then improve with the new type of stress. So the actual is, you can think of like lying down the ground a bit like it's a reset. Boom. This is what we're here to do. Okay. You've come from work, forget that for a second. You've been lying in bed all day, forget that for a second. We're here for a different purpose right now.
What a grounding effort too. Like it's the old headspace, right? You don't want to live in the future, don't want to live in the past. Try and ground yourself to be in the present at that moment. And it's also like a bit of a mindset. Like A, we're coming down, and B, I'm focusing on whatever the intent of the day is. This is a good time just to kind of go deep breath. I'm calming down and I'm thinking, what is the objective for today? What do I need to achieve?
I've always thought as a good session looks like a bell curve. So a good session is you kind of come in, we're at the bottom, we pick you up, we pick you up. We have like our main big purpose in the middle to build that kind of up. Normally it's these more, these kind of like strength, power, muscle building qualities. And then we drop off of the back end and we calm you down and we send you off on your way with with the ability to adapt on both ends.
I think that warm up's also a great time for yourself to kind of assess how you're feeling that day. As soon as you walk into the gym doors, it's kind of like, all right, how am I feeling? Is the body tight? Is my energy pretty good? Did I have something to eat earlier? What is my readiness for this session today? So, like by yourself, it's that self assessment. And for us on the coaching side, as soon as someone walks through the door, you're looking at body language. You're having a quick question like, hey, mate, how are you today? How you feeling? And you're really trying to pay attention to the responses to see, are they telling you porky pies or are they looking pretty ready and good to go? Because then that's going to dictate a little bit what we do in the warm up or how you might engage with that person later on in the session. So there's a lot that you got to kind of, A, from a coaching standpoint, do through that warm up as you're assessing someone. Or B, if you're by yourself and you're starting to go through your warm up process, you're also kind of asking those questions. Do I need to spend a bit more time maybe on the floor doing these movement prep drills? Or maybe do I need to spend more time trying to rev the nervous system up to get ready for whatever the day's task is?
And talking again about the kind of the studies that look at warm ups, well, the main purpose of a warm up is to kind of increase the performance of the session. And like Mitch just said, and like we kind of just put your eyes onto, it's kind of like there's going to be many different ways to achieve actually improving the performance of the actual session. And with that being said, like when you first get someone in, you need them to be that kind of relaxed to adapt changes in the body. And then, but then what are you going to do after that? Like, then you're going to have to like spike them up no matter what. And how does the spike up come? Like, that can come from easy, simple ability to do that. Is sometimes it's not the actual exercise they're going to be performed because we want their temperatures high. We want them nice and warm. Like, it could be bike sprints, it could be sprints, it could be like some cardio equipment to really get that heart rate up and get the blood flowing to the muscles. Because when we're talking about performance, temperature changes in the body have a massive effect on actually your performance to perform, right? Like we've actually got a really good study. You've got it up here, Kellen, have you?
Yeah, man, I got it here as well.
So if you just want to quickly run us through a couple of things in the study, just pick and choose a few little things. Like I think the vertical jump for me is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I like that one. And that's easy for everyone to imagine as well. So we're looking at a study that's looking at different temperatures and looking at both the core temperature and also the temperature of the muscles that are involved. And it's got these four different groups. So one's at a low temperature and then slowly works its way up, each being about a degree to 2 degrees apart. And what we're looking at here is that these vertical jumps, they've measured at each of the different temperatures. And just to give you guys a picture, so the group one, which has a core temperature of 35.8 degrees, their average vertical jump was about 32 to 40 centimeters. If we take that up to the last group, that's just 2.1 degrees higher in their body temperature. We're looking at a vertical jump of 51 to 59 centimeters.
Damn, boy.
So that is almost a 20 centimeter increase, looking at 2 degrees more body temperature. So, as well as that, it's important to look at the muscular temperature as well. So, that's about 7 degrees in muscular temperature difference between the two. So you're looking at about a 20 centimeter vertical increase, and that's just from the difference in temperature there.
So, and we can look at time efficiency, right? Like, so with that information, if your performance is along the lines of like increasing a vertical jump, well, and you don't need, so say for someone you're someone who's pretty mobile and maybe doesn't need a ton of movement and extras, well, that could be your warm up, couldn't it? That could be first off, I'd say you'd want to be doing something that gets the body temperature up nice and powerfully. And then second, I'd do something that actually repeats the exercise. So it is quite important to actually do like a similar type of exercise. The best way to do a similar exercise is to do the exercise you're about to perform. So for example, if I'm about to do squats, well, the warm up shouldn't just end and I get into my heavy squat. If I'm going to do a 100 kilogram back squat, well, I want to have a progression up to that top weight. And for number one, we're like increasing temperature is going to add more to that. But number two, there is an effect called the Treppe effect, or a simpler name we call it is a staircase effect. And it's simply the effect is each muscle contraction potentiates, so increases each subsequent contraction. So when I perform contractions in a certain way, I then perform them with a heavier weight, and they're actually potentiating each other. So you're not going to actually be at your strongest jumping straight into something. You're going to be stronger by A, warming up the body temperature, yep, and B, potentiating each muscle contraction until you've really got to go for it.
Yeah, 100%. I think we have touched on this before, but in terms of when you're strongest in your workout, you're looking at about your third set, second rep. So that's demonstrating that trap effect as well of how it's going to take you a while to potentiate up to get to that top set.
And also, and there we have like the different effects. We have a warm effect, we have a physiological effect, and there's a third really important effect to look at, and that's your central nervous system effect. So actually doing things that are extremely like explosive, fast in nature, where you have to wire the central nervous system to explode, and like it's kind of like just warming up your brain, being like, hey, we are ready to go. Fire things up to the specific muscles, and that again wants to be specific as well. For example, if I'm doing a big leg session or a big squat, then I'm pretty going to want to do something that's more explosive through the legs than something that's more explosive through the upper body, just so I can get them kind of them wires crossing.
It's really important too with this stuff. You don't want to really step on the toes of fatigue. And like as we said, the reps are pretty low, the weight's pretty light, but we're moving with intent. We're moving hard and fast and explosive. But we're not going to kind of screw ourselves before the main effort of the day. This is all a primer. We're getting the body ready for the main event. And we've got to make sure, obviously, we're not going in like overly gassed or taxed on the muscles prior to the main movement. So again, those reps are pretty low, the weight's pretty light, but we're moving it fast and explosive. Like squat, it's going to be like like a med ball vertical squat throw, a jump, or something of that nature. Again, kind of almost mimicking the main position of whatever the task is.
I think often you'll find as well is that fatigue doesn't set in quite as quickly as lots of people think. There's probably going to be quite often people situate a physical fatigue with a slight mental fatigue. So, oh, this is starting to feel hard, therefore I'm getting fatigued. Well, most of the time that is not correct. Most of the time it's actually like we look at them temperature increases. That's not going to be the most comfortable thing getting that hot. Your body's going to start sweating. You're going to start all them processes that are going to help you perform. In soccer, we used to have this thing where when we were warming up, we used to call it breaking your lungs in, and it's that kind of initial like we find that quite often with too light a warm up, what actually ends up happening without me actually getting gassed is the initial reaction to exercise is when your vagal system drops. So that's kind of the vagal system is kind of what holds you in parasympathetic. So when my heart rate is low, and then I do a little bit of exercise, the first thing that happens is rather than my body fire up loads of hormones to keep me nice and high, what it does is it actually tells my vagal system that calms me down to drop off. Yeah, and that's the first spike in exercise. That's the kind of one where you jump a really quick, like 40, 50 degrees in heart rate. And that's quite often what we must do before we start training. You want to have some kind of stimulus. You've got to feel like you've actually worked before you work, in a sense.
I don't know about you boys, like with the soccer route, but like for rugby, I never really felt in the game unless I made like 2 or 3 tackles. As soon as I've put that actual exertion, I had to really work pretty damn hard to get my body kind of prepped up and had that contact. I'm now in the game. I now feel good. I've ran the ball once or twice, or I've made 2 or 3 tackles. I'm now more present and in the moment, ready to play.
Yeah, there's something about being in that game situation. Like we used to run like a general specific warm up in like before just with your team, but I feel like there's something so different about like playing possession with your team versus actually getting out in the field and getting started. That it's
Mm.
just a different version of firing up.
That's exactly what I meant by breaking your lungs in. What it used to be is that we used to run sprints. And it used to feel like, oh, actually, these sprints feel really hard. Like,
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
not warm up.
Mm.
This is actually too hard. But then, exactly in game situations, you don't want to wait for the first sprint to warm up. You should have already done that. That's what I mean by kind of the fatigue. Like, you actually normally need to work quite hard to actually set yourself up for fatigue to then limit performance. But 100% is a big deal. Like, some people do way too much before they actually get into the actual real exercise, and it diminishes the returns.
It is relative to the individual's fitness level as well,
Yeah,
right?
of course. Yeah.
You got day one, never really moved before. That's going to be a very different effect versus, your mature athlete that's been doing it for quite a few years and is quite robust. So something to know if this is something that's applicable to yourself, it is also where you're at with your journey as well.
Yeah, totally. And when we're looking at the kind of the fitness and fatigue, one should not focus exclusively on the physiological preparation, right? Like, we actually want to make sure that we're not like we're talking about it as a physiological standpoint, but we also don't want to fatigue ourselves in any other way as such. Like, we don't want to fatigue ourselves too much mentally, and we don't want to fatigue the CNS too much as well. So, however, there is this kind of like this post-activation potentiation that we talk about, that can drive fatigue as well. Well, post-activation and potentiation is kind of, even though it sounds super complicated, it's quite simple. It just means that the exercise, I'm doing something to potentiate what I'm about to do, right? And that's what we want. We want a potentiation, not a fatigue. So we do exercises, for example, like these medicine ball throws, because they potentiate us. But you can do too much of that, and you might not feel physically fatigued, but you can be neurologically fatigued from that as well. So it's important to kind of understand that fatigue can come in many different aspects, and we don't want to be fatigued really from any point of view before we go into the main movement. But that doesn't mean bitch and moan about doing warm ups, right? Because you want to be ready. You need to be ready to go. The other thing with I think a massive thing with warm ups is time efficiency.
Oh yeah, 100%. And it depends on the individual, right? Like for us in here at Benchmark, we have a schedule. Like we have to tailor the warm up to what we need to do. Like say for example, if we're in a phase where we're looking to elicit more range of motion changes and we don't have so much volume or intensity, we're trying to get into the session. We've got a bit more time to play with the warm up. We can try and do more positional based breathing, more positional based drills to open up more range. But when we're working in the strength phase and we're trying to put some muscle on the frame, that warm up's going to drop by a bit because we need that extra time for more sets, for more reps, for longer rest periods in the main effort of the session. Hey, but guess what, mate? If you got the day off, it's Chrissy, you got all day to play around with, and you're feeling pretty tight, do whatever you want to do, man. You've got the time to stretch, mobilize, do whatever you want to do, right? So it's really, it depends on the person, how much time you have up your sleeve, and you as a person. If you're tight and jacked and you need more time to feel good, happy days, man. Spend more time on it. But if you've got time restrictions, you've got to maybe cut that down to get, because what you're there for is the stimulus, right? To get the adaptation. That's the main meat and potatoes. That's what you're after. And that's where we want to spend most of our time with our session.
And talking about that, let's say for example you do have a lot of time. There's also detriments that you can also do a few detriments to yourself by spending too long. Say for example, oh, I have an hour and a half, I have loads of time. My main strength session is going to take 60 minutes. I'm going to spend the first 30 minutes like warming up. And say for example your warm up consists of foam rolling and these really, really passive things. Well, we just spoke about picking up your nervous system. Well, it's going to be harder to pick your nervous system up and get excited and get to like what we call sympathetic if you spend 20 minutes lying on the ground foam rolling. You're going to start getting tired. Your body's going to start shutting down, being like, we're not about to train.
Yeah, it's
We're
sleepy
about to
time
go to
now.
sleep.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're
exactly.
sleeping time. And then on the back end of that, you're going to have to spend another few minutes trying to warm yourself up, which you are not going to be psychologically ready for. So it's going to be harder to do so. And that is going to psychologically, physiologically affect your actual session. So you have to take that into consideration. Like, I think nearly any of the information on foam rolling, where it does have this quite acute short effect of performance or mobility, it's only 30 to 45 seconds. And anything longer than that is actually shown to not do anything more or actually do less. And I take that into consideration, but then I just take into what I just said into consideration, where you actually might be just relaxing yourself too much. Yeah, and if you want to perform, you're gonna have to light yourself up a little bit.
Yep, and that could be a lengthy process. You're just eating more time.
Yeah, and it's meat and potatoes, right? Like what is your goal of training, right? And if say for example your goal of training is to actually mobilize more, to feel better in your body, to have more range of motion. There's plenty of cases where that will be the process. Well, if that's it, then spend more time doing that stuff. But if your goal is to build muscle, don't think that tons of foam rolling is going to get you anywhere near that goal. If anything, it's probably going to waste time towards that goal. Yep, because we all have busy lives, right? Like you need to make sure you're spending the time doing what you should be doing. And if your goal is to build strength and power, then again, foam rolling is not going to cut it much. It might help a little bit, or we say foam rolling, but any kind of like low intensity stuff. But there also is cases where what you do is going it can massively affect. And again, getting back into the studies of warming up, they only really look at the performance in short term, right? They look at, okay, they did this as a warm up, and this is what affected it. Number one, there's so many different protocols of warming up, so there is better protocols out there, I believe. And number two, what happens over a 6 week, 8 week time frame when you're doing really good movements that are going to help you open up joints, change skeleton positions, which help you use your muscles more appropriately? Well, I would say that if they could study that, or they do get around to studying that, they're going to see a bigger improvement. But it's a very, like when time comes into considerations of studies, things can get extremely messy.
Mm. I'm excited for those. I'm excited for that next evolution of information it's on the periphery at the moment of being studied. It's going to be really exciting to see that trickle down in the next 5, 10 years and kind of see that come more mainstream.
Yeah, the sad truth is there's just so many like ethical and just people being so different issues with actually doing a really good long-term study. You can't really look at exactly, you can't force people into living certain lifestyles that actually appropriate certain things. So, but one more thing with looking at a warm-up is injury prevention. I think that's probably something that's shouted out the most. It's something that people really sell, right? Like injury prevention is a massive sell. We hear all different words. We hear
Bulletproofing.
bulletproofing, robustness, like all these different words that kind of like facilitate, like make you think that okay, well, this is what I need to do because the warm up is going to massively increase my chance of injury. And first of all, I'd be like, where are you getting the injury? Are you getting your injury in your training? Is it from like an issue that just suddenly happened, or is it out on the field and stuff like that? Well, there is actually no evidence to point that warm ups really help directly with injury prevention. But like I said at the beginning of the podcast, there's a big systemic review showing that most warm ups increase performance. And then guess what we have? We have tons of evidence to say that increased performance is injury preventative. So while it's not direct, we can't say directly warming up will reduce injuries. We can say like indirectly warming up will reduce injuries. And then again, it comes to the type of protocol that people run through with their warm ups. Like, what is the goal? What is the aim of the warm up specifically? How do we warm them? How do we get them warm? How do we psychologically get them ready? How do we downregulate them at the beginning? And then how do we create more movement capacity?
Massively. Like in our sessions, we go for like that 80-20 rule, right? We're trying to affect most people with the most positive impact. But sometimes what you're doing might not hit that 20% exactly like you want it. And that's why I'm a big believer in, I know it's a mixed review out there in the strength conditioning world about screenings, but I really think there's a massive place for it to try and, at our facility, we do every one we try and get a screening with. And we can look at what range of motions are passively and actively available to that individual and feed them positions that give them more movement options before they start a session. So if they have more ranges available left and right of them, and I'm talking extreme cases where people like don't have much movement at all, we can give them those positions prior to the session. Well, guess what? They've got more positions they can sit into, and they're not so pigeonholed with their movement. And that's kind of what the warm up wants to be. It's there to elicit more options to you before you start the session. So you just don't have one or two dimensions to move in and have these compensation patterns. You have multiple variables that you can variations that you can play with what shapes your body needs to make. And we can strengthen it, and we can keep it, and we can move. Doesn't necessarily make you going to feel better, but we are going to eventually give you more movement options, which could make you feel better.
Yeah, and that's acute and chronic. Like in that small process of doing these warm-ups, you may be making these slight different, and these changes can be coming from neurological adaptations, and they can be coming from physiological adaptations. And then you might be making this slight little change of position that then feeds into them getting a better movement. But if that was looked at over one session, I wouldn't say you're going to get much. But if you keep doing the same kind of principles, the same kind of things over and over again, then I'd say you'd slowly pick up traction and get more and more range of motion. When we look at that, Mitch mentioned screenings. Well, the reason screenings are out there in the industry is people say, oh, I don't screen, I do screen. Well, we have a system where we get everyone into a screening, and it helps us massively as a coach. But the screening never ends at the screening. We get you in, we look at your movement, but we're always looking at your movement, right? Because things change. We know that, like, that when we got you in for that screening, for example, we try not to get people to have a session beforehand, because we know that session is going to facilitate better movement to some level. Therefore, we're not getting a real good picture of them. But we also have to understand that their day-to-day lives are going to change so much that one day they're going to come in with good movement, one day they're coming in with bad movement. We can't believe that movement is just a physiological process. It has so many other things that are going in line with it. So you want to get as much information from someone, because you kind of understand they're kind of neutral, if for lack of a better word. And then you're going to kind of be like, oh wow, like this is much different to what I've seen previously. And then you're going to have to, like, you're going to find out why that might be. And when we're screening someone for movement, we're also collecting data from them when they enter the gym door, right? You got to be like, hey, how are you doing? How are you doing today? And if someone does say to you, for example, oh, I'm feeling pretty rough today, actually, I haven't, well, and this is a cue from what we said earlier. Oh, I haven't stopped. Okay, well, boom, let's get you on the ground, right? Let's use a foam roller as a way just to actually relax you more than anything else happening. Or, oh God, I've just got out of bed. Okay, cool. Let's maybe get you on the floor, but let's get you on that bike, and let's get you moving. Let's get you heated up, and let's maybe use our words to motivate you more so, or use our words to calm you down more so,
Huge
to
point.
facilitate the what we want from the session.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, like you're saying, that is a really good point, because it doesn't always have to be physical. Like, to put someone from parasympathetic to sympathetic. And this is what we were talking about with those arousal levels, and what's optimal for your performance, and how we as coaches can help you out with that, with the way that we're behaving, the way we're cueing you as well.
I think it's interesting.
Especially.
I like this visual. I saw this in a post a while ago, but I thought I love it. I'm stuck it in my back of my head. And like, you'd have like the same person in two different circumstances, and we'll just say a table test. That's like, if you ever been a physio, that's when they lie on a table and they move your legs in certain positions to see what ranges are available. And you have person number one, and they're at the top of this mountain. There's like angels singing, and there's beautiful smells going on, and you're just relaxed as all can be. Guess what? You're going to have slightly above average ranges. Your nervous system is calm, the body's relaxed, and you're more likely to show more movement options. Versus this other variation, this person, like, I don't know, the music you hate, there's some death metal blaring, your body's jacked up, the person on you's being rough and aggressive, and you're overly stressed. You will show more restricted range of motions. Like, it's crazy the amount of emphasis, amount of control the nervous system has on ranges that we have available, right? So what environment you're in and what's kind of picking you up and pulling you down is massive. And that's kind of, I'm hoping I'm just driving this point home again, because we've already done it once or twice. What we're doing at the start of the warm-up, during the warm-up, and the finish of the warm-up is going to elicit kind of what options you do have available towards you. It's kind of nuts to think about that.
It is absolutely nuts, and I think sometimes it sounds like a bit woo-woo when you talk about it, but we are really complex. Humans are, and we have we always have signals coming from our environment and into our head, and then the brain sending out signals from the brain out to the body. And you think of, like, we have how many senses? Off the top of my head, I don't know how many senses.
Six, right?
Six, I want to say seven,
I
but
was just thinking the sixth sense.
I can't believe we don't actually know
it
how
is
many
five,
senses.
dead
it is
people.
Is
five.
it five senses? The sixth, that's it. Okay.
She's the dead people.
Simpsons tells you. Okay, so
Well, he was dead, right? That's the whole movie, right? He's dead. Yeah, sorry,
Mitch,
spoiler
why would
warning.
you do that for
Spoiler
anyone who
warning.
hasn't watched it? But then at all points, like our feel, our sight, our what we can smell, what we can hear, all these senses are playing to how we feel in that moment. So like like Mitch said, like someone coming in and and a coach shouting at you. For some people, that might drive them up to be like, "Hey, I want to perform more." And for some people, that's like it feels more like a traumatic
It'd be a bit
experience for them,
scary.
and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
more scary, and they're actually not performing as well. So it's really important to kind of get your understanding of where people are at, not just from a kind of screening point of view, but how they relate to exercise. And I think when we screen people, it's not always just Callum made this point really well. It's not just that we are looking at like where are you in your body. It's also we ask questions along the lines of like, have you had previous training experience, and then what did you like about that? And sometimes that is oh, I really liked when my coach shouted at me and belittled me, and we're like, okay, well, maybe it's not always the way we start it, but that can be something that we can take on board, and we can kind of aim our approach a little bit more in that direction. And it sometimes might be like, I hated it when this happened, or it might be that I hated it when I performed squats, lots of squats, because I don't like squats. And it might just be that we realize the body type is not so much designed for squats, and we can maybe limit how many squats you do for a while.
100%, or come up with variations that you feel more comfortable with. So you can build a plan before it even starts and just be a bit more comfortable and get some trust and buy-in, which is just going to mean that your body's going to probably have more movement potential. You're going to feel more comfortable during the session and get more adaptation. So getting to know someone here prior is so important, like you're saying, James. And we've chatted on this in the past a few times, but having that basic I know psychology behind training and human behavior and human interactions is a big part of what we do. And it doesn't seem like it's not, I love talking shit in sessions all the time, but it is selective shit talking.
Yeah.
There is times where it's for a laugh, and there is times where I'm generally want to know about your well-being and know how we can modify the session to your to get the best response out of you. So you really got to be playing that from the get-go.
Yeah, love that, and that's kind of like that's. I feel like we really touched well on like how you're going to start the very start of the warm up, and then a little bit more on like once we've got that information, like where we're going to push you from then on, and what you might want to do to get the most out of your warm up, and kind of like I think like on Instagram there is nothing but continuous different exercises to create range of motion. I think like would you guys agree that that's pretty what you see the most
I
of?
do see a lot of that.
I live in a bubble, so yes.
So I truly believe that that's probably what people must want to see a lot of as well. And I think some of the issues with these exercises are that there's just too many.
Yeah.
There's numerous, and they all have these claims of certain things. Well, we have a little bit of a different approach quite often to our aim with creating movement, and we're not so much looking at how the muscles create movement, which I think most people are looking at how hard can I stretch a certain muscle, how hard can I open up this joint with bands and so what. Well, actually, the actual best way to create a muscle change is to create a bony change. So
Mm.
actually, like I think foam rollers are amazing tools for this. The ground's an amazing tool for it. It's putting a foam roller on the pelvis to change the pelvis shape through forces to then create a bit of range of motion in the joint.
Let me use a saying. Bones act, muscles react.
Yeah,
Got
there
to
you
use
go.
it. Thank you, Gary Ward.
Yep.
Love you, mate.
And to that point, it's kind of like if we can put a bone at a certain point, well, the tension that was on a muscle will naturally normally release slightly. And again, you're not going to get a ton of bony change from one position, but over time, then once creating a change, then allowing the person to use that slight change slowly builds that kind of momentum towards better movement in general. And we see that all the time. Like we see continuously people come in with very unable to perform kind of like a very squatty squat to being able to in maybe everyone changes at different speeds, some people in a few weeks, some people in a couple of months, like to be able to perform like a ass to grass squat.
It's a huge point what you just said there, James, and it's a bit of the secret sauce of what we do, right? Is having a decent understanding about like how to influence those bony structures to elicit different muscle length relationships to get more range. And that's why we might use something like a heel wedge underneath you, or might change the load, like where you hold the dumbbell or barbell, as to try and put those bony structures in a position where they've got more movement left and right. Because if you're shoved all the way left to your like bony structure and your muscles like range of motion, can't go much. You can't go where you already are. So we're trying to find a position where you've got a bit more range. And I hope I'm not opening a bag of worms here, but we're also trying to affect what your center of mass, where your body likes to hold its weight. So if we can affect that, we know that you are going to have more movement options.
And
And feel better.
and these things are normally done better in this kind of like parasympathetic, these more relaxed positions, because once we are sympathetic, once we are jacked up, the body is actually restricting movement. more than actually creating movement. So these are better done in more lay-in positions, like on your side, on your back, on all fours, maybe. Different positions like that, but more when your heart rate isn't picking up. Because the second we stand up, guaranteed, get on our knees, the heart rate is going to pick up. It is going to be harder for us to create these bony adaptations, but there is still now then a more ability to create maybe some muscular change of positions, right? We can either then facilitate some connective tissue changes or maybe some muscular tissue changes through certain like stretch protocols. And then from there, it's kind of from that getting them up, right? And no matter what, we will always finish the warm up kind of standing to some level. We're going to be driving, like normally this is where we're throwing balls at each other, throwing balls at the ground, sprinting on bikes and stuff like that. And this is, you can look at this through that kind of small picture of like, we start on the ground, we slowly work them up. Well, or you can look at it from, I always like looking at it. I think people enjoy looking at it this way as well. There's this DNS, which is dynamic neuromuscular systems. The idea of that is kind of like it's the way you were born, like the way you were birthed. You started in this kind of like more lying down supine positions where gravity has the least effect on you, and then you slowly go into positions where you actually had to start to manage gravity. And then when we're looking at the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous systems, well, when I don't have to handle gravity, I'm much more likely to be more parasympathetic relaxed. And then when I have to handle gravity, I'm going to be much more sympathetic and like, okay, well, even though gravity seems like a slight force on you, it's quite a deal. Like
It's a constant force.
and it's constant as well over time. So really good things to talk about is kind of that process of a warm up. It is good to start down the ground, to slowly work your way up, to get up and then just get excited. And once we've got excited, and Mitch mentioned this really well, like bringing in heel wedges and all these things. Well, that's still the screening process. I've done a few squats with you, I've done a few movements, and I'm looking at that person, I'm saying, oh, they're really struggling to get into the hips. Well, maybe I want to give them a wedge of some sort, or maybe I want to change their foot position, or maybe I want to give them a different type of cue. And maybe when we get into the main movement today, they should be doing this exercise, and maybe that will be a constant from then on. Maybe this is the exercise they would do for a while to facilitate the change. And then once we've done that kind of warm up, and I think a good warm up seamlessly kind of progresses into the main exercises, right?
Mhm.
We're doing our main exercises, and like we spoke about, we're getting warm. We still got some more neurological adaptation to make. Let's move some lighter weight in the same movement you're about to do. Let's fine tune our movement. Let's move it again a little bit heavier. Let's move it again a little bit heavier. And then we got that Treppe effect where we're contracting, and then we're just good to go. And I think it's that again, Mitch said secret sauce. This is how people make progress. These are the simple things that not many people do. They don't think it's worth the time. And truly, this is the stuff that is worth the time.
That was a really good summary there, James. That was
Thank you.
awesome. But yeah, that's the protocol we'll use here at Benchmark. And I feel there's a lot of stuff that you could even just rip off and implement into your own training if you don't train at this facility. That's kind of like how we can solve so many movement solutions is just understanding what the person represents by knowing what their screening data was or seeing what they represent in real time. We can use what we call constraints. So we can stop you moving into certain positions. And that forces you to get into a shape that's going to be more successful for you. Like James said, after X amount of time, hopefully that's a long-term adaptation. And maybe we can take that away up and look to challenge your system in a slightly harder way, whatever that is. That can be done in 100 different ways.
I think a few really interesting things about when you're looking at the actual training portion, and then you're looking at the warm up portion of training. It's things that people don't truly consider. Is the warm up it's like when we train, right? We have a program, we have periodization. But how come we don't pay so much attention to a periodization or a program to warming up? And how come we don't have it scale? How come we don't have 1 week? Okay, well, we've spent a couple of weeks on this. Let's progress the time. Yep. Let's progress the weight. Let's make the exercises a little bit higher intensity. And I think that's something that's really like is lacking. Here at Benchmark, we definitely like change this time frames of warm ups considering what we're doing. We have a time frame, and I think most people should try and keep to some sort of time frame when they're training, because otherwise rest recoveries really get messed up. But here what we do is we actually will, when we're trying to get into the more strength stuff, we will change the programs considerably for that. And also at the same time as warm-ups will become more intense with certain exercises. For example, like the groin positions. Like you could be for a couple of weeks putting someone in a position where they can relaxedly get their groins in a better length tension relationship. And then for a couple of weeks after, you can use more activation drills to start activating them, get into fire a little bit better in them positions. And I feel like this is something that's missed out. I feel like in warming up, people don't pay enough attention to volumes. Like, if anything, like if I can facilitate a certain change today with 10 seconds of a certain position, well, do you reckon 10 seconds is enough tomorrow? It's not. It's going to be 12, 15 seconds I'm going to need, or I'm going to need to change the position to make it more intense. I think it's something that we definitely don't see in the industry enough.
Definitely too. And you talk about periodization. You can like periodization just means there's a plan, there's an intent through certain phases, and we can't cover everything. And a warm up can be a way to keep other qualities alive in the
Hmm.
background while you have main focus on intent on something else. Like an example of this, if we're going through like a big strength phase and we're just being fridges, moving weight and putting on some muscle and getting strong, well, we can do some bouncy, jumpy stuff in the warm up to kind of keep those elastic qualities alive without like doing too much nervous system like damage before our main movement or muscular damage. So we can kind of plan our warm up to keep all these other beautiful athletic qualities alive in different phases, depending on what we're working on.
That's such a good point. And when we're looking at that kind of bell curve of training, say for example you are starting at the bottom and then you're peaking them up at the top. Well, say for example I'm peaking someone on a heavy squat. Okay. Well, what but I want to get some core work in that session as well. I want to get these certain movement qualities in the session, and or I want to stimulate certain muscles in the session. But I don't want to pair my squat up with something that's ground based because that's just going to calm them down to then get back into the squat. I want them to be excited still, so I want them to keep moving. Well, where's the perfect time to add that stuff in? It's in the warm up, right? And then people just think, oh, this is just warm up stuff. No, well, this is actually planned. This is something we want you to be doing throughout the day, but it's the best place for it. So warming up is just not about warming up. It's actually, you look at the volume, you look at the type of movements that you're doing in a warm up, and you can really organize them to make sure you're getting something that where it's the best place for that thing to be.
Holy shit, who would have thought so much goes into it?
Yeah.
It's like it's been thought through or something.
Other things that I think are super interesting is certain exercises and certain warm up drills. We look at, for example, a bench press, and with a bench press, over time, people that do a lot of heavy bench presses, their actual body position changes. They get quite flat front to back because if I'm lying on my back, I have a something pushing me from the back end, squishing my rib cage from the back. But then I also have a very heavy weight out in front of me from the front. Well, I'm getting squished front back, and that plays a serious role in my joint shape and position for me to have range of motion. Whereas some people who are very heavy bench pressers want to lose all the range of motion they have, and they probably don't want to even be able to wipe their bum eventually, so they can be the strongest possible person. Yeah. Most humans who train in a gym want to be able to move as well as possible and still have a pretty impressive bench press. And then we can look at things that squish you side to side. An exercise that squish you side to side can be as simple as a side plank, where we utilize gravity or other loads or muscular tension to then squish you side to side to open up the range of motion to then be able to perform a bench press again. And these are numerous. Like, same thing with squats. Like if you are struggling in the mid range of a squat, you can use the change shape of squishing a pelvis side to side to utilize that range of motion in the squat. These things are numerous, and there's also there's some serious detail on why you might choose certain warm up drills for certain exercises. So that quite often what you find is any athlete that's actually any good at what they do, will have to facilitate their range of motion to the activity that they are trying to create, and they will lose other ranges of motion because it's no longer useful for them, and it's because they don't do it very often. Well, quite often, to keep someone healthy as a healthy human being but still perform, they need to be given range of motion that they don't have to then lose it again. And even though it seems like
Mm.
a useless process, it's a very important process to keep this person feeling like happy, healthy, and injury free.
Absolutely goddamn huge point, man. That is just not an area that's talked about nearly enough. These positions we put people in are going to elicit certain responses, and we are what we do, right? If you powerlift forever and you're squishing yourself front to back, awesome, great. That's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to have rotational qualities and be able to make more shapes with your body, well, we're going to need to offset it with something if you're not going to change up that training style. And like you said there, James, like side planks, those arm bars, anything side loaded orientated, squishing you from that side, like top side to bottom side, it's going to help keep those qualities alive, right? Teach you to get in and out of your hip a little bit more effectively and not so much be a fridge. Ah, I love that point. I'm in an echo chamber here, but let's just all give ourselves a clap.
Yeah. Yeah, pat on the back. So common like warm up, I'd say kind of myths,
Mm,
or maybe people not using things right, Can you guys think of any off the top of your heads?
Well, I think like we've touched on a couple of times, and it's the foam roller stuff is kind of I think still very mainstream. And again, foam rollers actually got some really cool uses. Like we said, it gets you on the ground. We can actually use the foam roller in certain portions of our skeletal structure to help put some pressure on some areas to open up ranges. So it depends on the body morphology of the individual. Like you can place that foam roller to get a really cool positive effort. But how more commonly used, just flopping on it for a very long period of time, probably won't do too much. So foam roller definitely has a place. It is great for getting you to the ground. It's great for chilling out the nervous system, and it can actually elicit some really cool range of motion changes if used very intelligently.
Yep. With that being said as well, so gets you on the ground. Also, there is some good evidence to say that it will release muscle tone in the muscle that it's on, but it's kind of like it's a bit of a give and take, and it doesn't so much increase too much range of motion. But there is also evidence to say that it increases range of motion. Um, One thing that I think is really interesting about kind of foam rollers is its neurological effects with that increase in tension in the muscle and why it feels so good for most people. You can kind of think of it as in the morning when you put on your socks. Like say in the morning, I get out of bed, I put my socks on. Well, I instantly feel my socks. I can actually feel the experience of having my socks on, and that slowly dissipates. Now I can no longer sense my socks because my brain realizes that it's energy inefficient to continuously feel my socks all day. And the same kind of thing happens when I'm releasing a muscle. So, say for example, and it's not so much as physiological as some people think. It could be very neurological. Say, for example, I do have some pain in my hip, but then I get a foam roller and I roll out around below my knee. Well, actually, your brain's kind of like saying, well, this is the sensation that I am now feeling. And hence, it cancels out the other sensation of kind of the pain for a short period of time, just because of my brain can't sense really more than one thing constantly at the same time. It's more likely to just sense something as a whole. So it actually kind of switches off one sensation in reward for feeling another sensation, which is quite often why people feel so good for foam rolling. And I think it's quite important for people to kind of understand what might be the process that's going in there, because then once you kind of know the process and what might be happening neurologically, physiologically, then you might be able to make a better decision on what's best for you for your specific warm up.
Don't get me wrong, there is a part like if you just like doing it and it makes you feel really good, cool. Keep at it, man. If that's what gets you going and that's what makes you happy, who cares if it does or does not elicit the response you're after? If you enjoy the process and you have the time available to you,
Yeah,
do you, man?
I agree, but then at the same time, take into consideration, yeah, your time frame. Yep. And if you aren't getting results, yep, then maybe look at why you're not getting results.
Mm.
And with that information to back it up, be like, oh, well, maybe that 30 minutes of foam rolling wasn't as useful as I could have been doing some, I don't know, bicep curls.
And like we've already touched on this point a little bit. I think another one of those common misconceptions is like you must do like a 6 minute stretch routine every morning, or you must do 30 minutes of mobilization every day. Like strength, you know what? Here's a big one, right? Strength is mobility. Strength through good ranges of motion with good position is range of motion, right? So like learning how to kind of influence your skeletal structure to like from a stacked position, from an alternating position, from a rotating position, you are going to have more movement options at your disposal. So, mate, hand on the heart on the sleeve here, good strength positions will give you more range of motion back. You don't have to be doing lots of passive modalities to try and get range of motion. I'd say that probably not as beneficial as well.
I would just like just on that, I just say that when we're creating strength changes, we create a connective tissue tightness. So we just got to look at what we're adapting, what we're changing. If I'm doing a big strength exercise, but I may be neurologically coordinating the exercise that is at play for its full range of motion, which is going to be very beneficial for movement and mobility. At the same time, what I may be doing is I may be actually creating tension through certain soft tissue connections. So when we're doing these more passive range of motion movements, I think of it, some of the greatest ones I think is actually something that people don't do enough. It's the kind of that Tai Chi type stuff. But it's very passive. It's very involves a big amount of range of motion. Well, these things allow like blood flow, lymphatic drainage, and also allow connective tissues to be very soft and relaxed. Strength training at the end of the day is always going to create some sort of tension, but it will help you create the range of motion through the exercise that you are doing.
I think the old static stretching is still like quite a common thing. I
Yeah,
see the old toe touch and the old, those common, the quad stretch still quite prevalent in team sports and other facilities.
I
Like,
think I feel like with static stretching, I feel like it's been misunderstood so hard. And again, studies really, really mess up people's understanding of exercise. When a study becomes mainstream, people get super confused about what's actually happening. The initial static stretching was always a really popular thing, and then I think in 2013, a study came out where they did a hip flexor stretch. And in that hip flexor stretch, they stretched it for 3 to 4 minutes. And then after the 3 to 4 minutes hip flexor stretch, they got someone to stand up and do a vertical jump, or I can't remember if it was a horizontal jump. And it actually decreased the amount of jump they could do. Well, I think that's actually kind of like a stupid study in a sense where, of course, you're not going to be jump hard after you've just been static. All the things that we've just spoken about are things that perpetuate exercise and movement, and we know that's something that doesn't. But very recently, studies with static stretching have come out to actually show that they can change fascicle length, so they actually change the muscle fiber length, and then they can also provide more range of motion through joint ranges, especially if people are limited already, and actually can create a muscular growth because like Mitch just said, stretching and strength training are not that dissimilar. When I do a squat, I have to go through a lengthened phase of a squat anyway, and it's the same thing as just holding a position for a long period of time. So there is these kind of muscular changes that take place to create more range of motion.
And these static positions, I think these ones for that muscular adaptation, the big difference there was they're isometric holds against certain with high outputs, right?
Oh, they were massive. They were like it was like
45 seconds or some shit.
oh, what way
really
long,
high
way
outputs.
longer. They were like, you're not gonna. I think one of them was 8 minutes. Like
Oh,
you're gonna.
fuck that.
Who's gonna? And
Fuck
the
that.
intensity of the stretch was like
Mm.
a 90 to 95% intensity.
Yeah.
So you might as well just do some squats. You're gonna enjoy it more, and you're gonna facilitate
Mm.
other, like, you're gonna facilitate other qualities at the same time.
Another one to touch on there too is kind of like people using that static stretch for flexibility, if you will, that stretch tolerance, right? Going to touch your toes and sit on your butt, reaching your toes, isn't necessarily making you more mobile. Your nervous system's just dulling down that pain response in a long-term effect. It takes a long time, but literally what like kind of hurts as you reach down to your shin, your nervous system just dulls down that sensation. You can get a little bit further. It's not necessarily changing your pelvic structure or your hamstring length too much. It's just your nervous system getting more comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yep. And it does get more complex, like Mitch said, with a toe touch because there is many more muscles in play. You don't know what position you're in that's going to facilitate what muscles. And also at the same time, it's there's more biarticular muscles in play, and biarticular muscles are way more complex than your monoarticular muscles, like across one joint. So whereas most studies are done, like, and you look at strength studies and you look at mobility studies, they're always done through quite a simple joint. We look at a lot of knee extension stuff and we look at a lot of ankle flexion stuff, and that's kind of like this stuff doesn't always correlate to its more complex movements.
I guess another one. This is like we can do a whole nother body on this, but this is just a really quick one. Give this some love. Like a cool down, like it doesn't necessarily. It can be like first thing. It should just be like calm me down. Remember that bell curve? We're starting off pretty relaxed, and then we're peaking up in the meat of the session, and then we're dropping back down. Like a cool down can honestly be whatever. We love using pranayama breathing in here for other reasons, but one of the biggest things is just to chill the nervous system out. And this can be you back on the foam roller. It can be whatever, but something that's going to down regulate you and get you back into like, oh man, I feel pretty chill. Rather than my heart rate still thumping and pumping. I'm like, oh, I got to catch a train in 2 minutes. Giving you that extra bit of time to down regulate and then slowly leave the door going, I feel good, man. Give you so many extra hours head start on that adaptation process, which can get you back in the session quicker too, because you've had more hours of recovery. So it doesn't have to be any said thing, but we big fans of breathing, but whatever like modality you like to use to chill yourself out.
And when you talk about bang for your buck, I don't think there is anything that has more bang for your buck than calming down with your breathing at the end of a session. That's where static stretching is also something that's kind of been misled. Is that actually, well, static stretching after a training protocol pretty much shows no benefit. It does not return muscle length to back to. I think that was the original thought, right? Has anyone ever heard that? Where they believe that after you do training, you shorten your muscles so dramatically that you then have to do stretches to return your muscle back to its original length. I think that was the hypothesis originally on stretching, when actually that stretching does nothing after training to actually facilitate any of them things or anything really beneficial that it can be useful for before training. Because you want to stretch or to some level change joint shape, change bony shape, or facilitate a muscle length before training to then put some strength on that.
It's fantastic. It's a lot to ponder there, right? There's a lot going on.
And that's what the first 10 minutes of a training.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now let's tackle
Just
the
wait
actual
till we get to
session.
the actual session. You're in trouble.
Yeah.
Any other fallacies, or I shouldn't say fallacies, but any other common questions that we haven't hit, boys?
I think again, like how long should a warm up be? We spoke about time efficiency, and I just think like the warm up is as long as it needs to be, right? Like, and you need to continuously ask yourself questions at the end of the session when you didn't perform so well. Like, could I have done like this better? Could I have done that better? Like, what could I change in my warm up to facilitate a greater change? I think some of the information we've put in there today really drives home that warm ups are important. Like we just speaking about like increasing body temperature, and good ways to increase body temperature are going to be like there's going to be different ways to increase. So one thing we kind of touched on with them studies is there was a core temperature and then was the specific muscle use temperature. So we actually want to make sure that we are kind of heating up both, right? While the core temperature is always going to increase, we want to actually make sure we're focusing some temperature into the muscles that are about to work. That's why you might want to do something a little bit more general as a warm up, and then you want to make sure that you're doing that something a little bit more specific.
I'm just trying to think in my head. Like, I think there's straight away like a camp that's, I wouldn't say against this. It's still a warm up, but they pay off a lot of this sort of stuff, and maybe I can explain their lens a little bit more. There is a camp with the warm ups, just like just get under the bar and do a couple of reps on the bar. We said that earlier. That 100%, man. Like, progressively load the bar and get into a squat. But there's so many other things that we just talked about right earlier, with positions that we can open up, ranges that we can go for, prepping the nervous system up for a greater output, that PAP effect, right? There is so much more that can kind of go into it to elicit more of a positive response. Don't get me wrong, getting under the bar and just doing a couple of reps, there is nothing wrong with that whatsoever, and still got a lot of cool stuff about it. But we can get more bang for our buck with that slightly more thought out process with our structure of our warm up. But that's kind of one of the first things I think about. Kind of, again, I feel like we shit on this group a lot, and I don't want to. It's just a very good example. The powerlifting community would like not really do much of this and just do a few reps with the bar, whether it's bench, squat, or deadlift, and that is it.
Yeah, but my question then is how much can you increase your actual core body temperature just by doing a couple reps? Like, it would take you a fair few reps to get that core body temperature as it would to just spend a minute out on the bike as a general warm up beforehand.
And look at the exercise, right? Like, well, we can all agree that maybe with the squat you are, but like if your main movement that day is going to be a bench press, then you're going to be lying on your back, and your core temperature is not going to be that high. Therefore, you're probably not going to be facilitate as much actual heat into the pecs, which is going to be your main driving muscle. So I'd say that like there's going to be maybe, oh, I'm doing my squats. Well, maybe I can just do some high rep squats. I can ladder it down to some heavy weight. That might. I still think you're going to be better off doing something a little bit more.
Yeah, because then you're edging on fatigue as well.
Exactly. And then you might want to do like maybe your light ball throws or sprints as well. Like I think we've hit the back. We've really hit with the reasons and what you want to be doing and what you can kind of choose. But I think if you're doing a bench press or like you're doing these kind of more upper body. We all know how it feels to get upper body hot. You don't feel that good. That's why probably most of us prefer benching over squatting half the time, right? But I feel like if you're going to go into a squat, you might be able to facilitate it. But then if you're going to go into a bench, I don't think you will be able to anywhere near as much. I think that there's a reason why at Benchmark we still do warm-ups, right? Because we question everything, and I like to think that we're not a place that just does something because people do it, right? We have a reason behind most things, and I think there's a lot of information out there for like you can understand why people might not think warm-ups are beneficial because there's not actually much studies done on warm-ups as such, right? And there's no specific protocol to be used. This is where you've kind of got to try and error things, and you've got to. I think it proves itself that it does work.
And mate, like we're in a kind of accumulation phase at the moment where we're trying to just get more volume in and get these guys and girls some muscle on the frame. Our warm-up's gone for 10 minutes. That's it. It's not that long.
Even less, sometimes 8. Like, and it's driving the priority home, right? Like, what is your priority right now? Well, if it's volume, then let's spend as much time doing volume as possible, and that's not waste too much time with the warm-up. And then there's times when we really want people to perform, and with the strength things, it's like we spend way more time jacking you up and getting you like really hot.
An hour potty for a 10-minute warm-up.
I love it. I think it's fantastic.
But like James said earlier in one of the points, I can't remember what it was, but like it's not just a one-off effect. It's compounded by many, many sessions, and you are having different variations of that warm-up depending on what the task is. So if your day is structured, we're very upper-lower at the moment. Like I'm using a warm-up to elicit a better bench press on my upper body days because they're my main KPI lifts. They're the ones I'm trying to get better. And on my deadlift day, I have a different warm-up that's going to be more probably focusing on opening up the back of the pelvis and warming up the lower body for that movement. And on a squat day, I'm more trying to get that front of the pelvis, that more range of motion to get deeper into my squat or to elicit whatever outcomes I need for it. But then I'm repeating that over like whatever, how many weeks. I'm getting so many times where I'm touching base with this warm-up protocol, and I'm collectively getting all those benefits over not just one session, but like by 2 weeks, by 4 weeks, by 6 weeks, or whatever it happens to be. You know what? That eventually comes into a position where you get to keep those range of motions that have been opened up, and we've added some stimulus over them. And hey, guess what, man? After week 8, we've put on a shitload of more muscle, but also we're moving better.
Yeah, and like really, you can say for example, you are someone who I'm doing a bench press day, and I'm just going to focus everything on the upper body. Well, I know for a fact that some people, if they don't move their knees much, like get knee pain. Like so, say for example, I'm 3 days away from my next squat session. In between that, I have a rest day and an upper body day. Well, there's no reason. There's always like if you can explain the why, then do it. And if on my bench day, it helps me to actually mobilize my kneecaps as well, so that tomorrow I can perform better with my squats, and I don't allow any like excess. Well, I lost the word. What you call it? Inflammation to store up in that joint. Then I might feel better the next day from doing my when I do my squats. It's kind of like it's just logical thinking, isn't it? It's like you're thinking logically. You have a why, you have a reason behind it, and I think it's mostly due. Warm ups are inherently really helpful for the reason that most of us have really non-movement days.
Yeah.
So it can just be facilitating up certain movements that make you feel better. Maybe it's not in that session, because I think that's the issue with all the studies, right? They look at just right now. This is how it helps you now, but what about how it helps you tomorrow? We get so many members coming here who will say, "Oh, I feel so sore when I don't train for 2 or 3 days," right? Well, so that's a reason for adding more stuff into your warm ups. Yeah,
Yeah, it's about that nice like holistic approach to your health and your workout
holistic.
scheme,
Yes,
as
fantastic.
opposed to being like single. Oh, it's push day, it's bench day. I'm only going to do upper body stuff. Like having that whole idea of what you're doing with your health and your program.
Yeah, beautiful. And the warm up allows that to be put in, doesn't it? It allows like, and it's kind of like a no questions asked place to put stuff that they might be like, oh, I don't feel like I'm working hard enough.
Yeah, you feel like you're not wasting your session time or anything like that.
And that brings me to another kind of point is how often people need kind of like they need to feel stim. They need to feel tons of stimulus. Well, the cool thing about warm up, it can be a very low stim feeling. And everything else is always, they feel like it could be the most important time because they actually we can feed them some low stim stuff that for the rest of the session feel like, I just feel like I'm not working because I'm here to work, you know?
Oh, there's definitely that population. And I think we've seen it quite heavily with kind of ex-park trainers that have been out in the park, and you only have so many variables to play with when you're in a park. And intensity is probably the main one, right? Get them to run faster, do 100 bloody push-ups, star jumps, whatever it happens to be. It's a very intensity of, I think it's low-key shit. I think there's more variables to play with outside, but it's one that's commonly used, and that mentality shifts into an atmosphere like here. And it's like I think we we're just about to say, right? It's a time and place thing. There's time to stim up. You shouldn't be chasing stim from the get-go as soon as you enter the doors and using that as the only validation to a good session or a good outcome. There are way more positive responses and adaptations we get when stim isn't there, when it's relaxation, when it's calm. Again, we're reiterating this point for the 20th time today.
Such a good point that the kind of the validation, the coach needs to validate themselves by making you stim, like to give you so much stimulus that you just feel like, oh, that was a good session.
Yeah.
When you know your stuff, you're like, I know this is working in the background. It doesn't have to be this massive amounts of sensation and stimulus for you, because come tomorrow, you'll be feeling better and moving better, and you'll be able to repeat the sessions, and we're going to see the most amount of results over 3 to 4 months.
I love useless sayings is another one. Any idiot can make another idiot tired.
Yep.
You get anyone that's unqualified and they can make you buggered, right? It doesn't mean it was worth your time, your effort, or especially your money. You're looking for the best response and your dollars well spent, your time well spent to get the best outcome for you.
Yeah, and you quite often you find that those we're kind of going off topic.
Yeah.
But anyway, quite often you find with them people is that what they do is they don't return, or they do return, but just not as often as they could because they're so destroyed from the session. So I think it draws a good point to low stimulus training.
Shall we wind it up, lads?
I think so. Before we go off on another tangent.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, guys. I hope you have a great day, and mate, I hope your warm ups. I hope your warm ups are just beneficial. I hope you get a lot out of them.
They make you
That's
warm.
it. Yeah. Move well, feel well, perform better.
Ah, lovely.
All right. Peace out.
Cheers,
Bye.
guys. See ya.